Good day, everybody. How's it going out there? If you asked me a year from now how FurAffinity was doing or how FurAffinity would be doing, and if you ask the general fandom on the heels of the passing of Dragoneer, I think a lot of furries were a bit pessimistic. But given the circumstances, and now that a year has passed, I'll say this: when during like the mid to 2010s to about probably until about last year, I basically didn't use FurAffinity much at all, if at all. But in the past year, I have found myself going back to it every once in a while, and I have seen what I've in my opinion are improvements. And I think one of the latest improvements has been such a boon, and like has obviously hits in the cockles of my nonfiction writing hot and my writing hot, that I think it deserves its own video. I usually don't make videos about updates to furry websites because they happen a lot of time, and typically they're very technical, and most furries and myself aren't that technically inclined as far as that kind of thing goes. But this is a visible improvement on FurAffinity's part, so I wanted to make a video on it, especially in the shadow of another furry website that's well known for writing and the situation that's happening there, which has also caught me by surprise and not in the best of ways. So, first off, FurAffinity announced it's making progress on its 2025 roadmap. And it shows here a list of things that they had completed this year. 2-factor authentications in development. Looks like a dev-friendly initiative is also in development. So it sounds like they want to try to make it so that people who want to, develop for FurAffinity can do so in a more friendly manner and contribute to it. I don't know if it's just for their internal teams or if it's for like in general, but that'd be kind of cool. Like it's like, hey, I think this thing would be cool to add to FurAffinity, and here's a prototype, and can we implement it? I think that sort of community sense of thing will help FurAffinity in the long run, and that's especially true given what we're going to talk about near the end of this video. But the big one that I thought was pretty cool is the writing updates, and they also seem to have an audio player update. Which I haven't fully looked at or dealt with as of yet, but it sounds pretty cool if they're working on like non-art updates. And usually non-art, furries typically take the back seat, so the fact that they're focusing and working on these things is great. So the biggest thing about the writer update that is really, really cool is FurAffinity is finally text friendly. And it's sort of late to the party a little bit, some would argue. Ink Bunny has had basically a page turn feature on its site for a while. Basically, it takes the text, it puts it in a box that's about the size of the screen. You don't have to scroll up and down, and you can turn the pages by clicking like the next page button instead of scrolling up and down, which can lead to inconvenience and losing your place. FurAffinity, and then obviously you have SoFurry, which uses the you put all the text there, and it'll put all the text on a web page, and you scroll up and down. FurAffinity was absolutely the worst of the big three of SoFurry, Ink Bunny, and FurAffinity when it came to uploading writings, because what you would do is you would upload a document or a text file, and the person would have to download that document and text file to read it offline for the most part. But a way to sort of work around it for shorter stories was to basically take all that text in your story, put a copy of it in the description for the writing, and then the person could just basically read your description. Of course, for longer stories that were longer than the character limit, you'd have to basically tell them, well, sorry, you're going to have to download and read it off-site. Not very convenient in our modern era, especially as mainstream computers, start to flow away, and most people want to deal with things on site instead of saving local copies, which, most older furries and most data saving furries will probably be against that sort of thing. They said, save local copies of this content anyway. You never know when the internet will be forever gone, or if somebody's going to take more, win the war on censorship on the internet, and all of a sudden all the furry content that you like is suddenly nullified, as it were. But long of the short is, FurAffinity now has the ability for everything, I think, except for document files, like Word document files. It has the capacity to share it. So what you're seeing here is a screenshot of the copy of one of the fanfiction.net works I did a long time ago. I basically put a copy of it on the furry sites that I'm active on, FurAffinity and SoFurry. And so you could see here that underneath the story thing, instead of having a description and all that stuff, you now have a scroll bar and a different formatting, like a sort of, inverted sort of element within the page that basically allows you to scroll it without scrolling the whole page. Now, you still have to scroll, and, that can lead to its own challenges, but there's now no character limit. Like, this story is the entirety of a 25 chapter, I think it was like 100,000 words, story. So like all of that, you can read it right now on FurAffinity. Whereas before, I had a short description of the story and like its history on fanfiction.net, and basically, was able to, you're saying, well, if you want to read it, you have to download it. Now you no longer have to do it. You can read it fully on site, which is really cool because, and one could argue that it's like, well, maybe you're like, a person in the desert in any oasis of updates, for FurAffinity is a breath of fresh air. And I gotta say, that's my hands off to the Skiggles team for sure. Over the past 12 months, I've seen more updates to FurAffinity than I think I've seen on FurAffinity for probably the past decade, to be quite honest. So it's a big visible change, is that like now you can actually consume, writing works on the website. So that being said, when it comes to furry writings on the internet, FurAffinity has now increased its ability to be usable by furry, fiction writers and content writing creators. So it's kind of kicking on the heels of SoFurry, which now, for argument's sake, I think sort of has, while not the worst sort of way to read online. Actually, I think fanfiction.net, ironically, probably now has like comparatively worse than SoFurry as far as like interface goes, as far as options go, for like cozy modes and things like that. But I will say, like, of the big three, I think SoFurry now, ironically, is probably the worst of the three as far as like writing on the internet in the modern era. Now, it's cool that now, because before it was, before this update, it was definitely FurAffinity, like definitely FurAffinity. I mean, FurAffinity and SoFurry might be close because, like, I don't know if there's many options that you can do to change the text formatting and all that stuff. If it's just a simple like table and stuff like that, whereas like SoFurry, you may be able to format it and put margins and do all that stuff. So SoFurry definitely still has, it's definitely like comparable, but now it's comparable. Before it was like SoFurry was Ink Bunny and SoFurry were kind of close, but FurAffinity was far behind. Now FurAffinity's caught up, and it's like, we may be in an issue where, SoFurry has to maintain its status in order to retain furry writers who will stay probably due to tradition. But, and it's a big but, right now SoFurry is dealing with a situation that they didn't quite, they wanted to, they were somewhat planning but not really planned for, and things came up urgently. And basically at this point, if you try to access SoFurry, it's saying that the server's offline, and there's a site transition to SoFurry Next, which is their new sort of thing. Now, big risk, big reward. If SoFurry Next ends up making it a lot better for writers than this new FurAffinity update, then, people may retain it. But from the sounds of it, it sounds like SoFurry Next is actually focusing more on making it better for artists and general like artistries and things like that, and trying to, focus on changing its site in that way so that furry artists use it more often. There's definitely some furry artists I know that use SoFurry as a thing, because they don't like they don't like Ink Bunny, they don't like FurAffinity, so SoFurry is sort of their neutral ground, third party that they prefer. But definitely the history of SoFurry and its previous quote unquote unfortunate name of Yifstar, as some people would say it was an unfortunate name, because who says the word Yif anymore? It was an older word, and obviously they wanted to change it to be more general, and so that the site was more approachable, and yes, that's sort of what happened a little bit, and they've made rules over time, obviously, that has leaned into that a little bit. But that being said, right now there's no SoFurry at all. There's no way to access the site. There's no way to, and it's been this way for a bit of time now. Unfortunately for them, and definitely not planned by them. It has been down since. It's still down as of the recording of this video on September 13th, and it's been down since July 10th. So it's been all summer, like basically all summer, and we're approaching the fall. So it's been about 3 months at this point. And it's about 2 months right now, right? 7/10 to 9/13 is about 2 months. So it's been down for 2 months. FurAffinity's been down, like, historically, I think the worst it was down was like a month or two as well. So obviously not historic in any sense, but certainly concerning for SoFurry fans that it's been down for so long. And the issue I think that's occurring, the issue that it appears like is occurring here, is not the relation of money or, compensation or anything like that. It's more of resources of time and personnel. Because here we see on Blue Sky, a Cobalt from LV, Cobalt, on Blue Sky saying, if it's a funding issue, I suggest a donation drive. When you guys suddenly dropped all content hosting 2 months ago, I never have dreamed you would have failed to have anything up by now. As somebody working tech knows, nothing is as fatal to a business model as extended delays. And Tormal, who's the person who is the owner of SoFurry, and the main site lead there, says, normally we would have done that all in the background, but the forced move made that impossible. Also, the business model of SoFurry is there to be there for the users. We don't have a budget. Employees are really a business. Handful of ad banners that don't cover the cost notwithstanding. It looks like I didn't quite get the full quote, but after that he does state that, it's not really a money issue. It's more like a personnel issue. That he and one other person are the main sort of site leads and the main people implementing these updates and moving the server. And both of them are fully overemployed people who have skill sets that are used by employers that pay their bills, more than likely. And obviously SoFurry doesn't pay the bills because it's a service that's provided to its users for mostly free. And, the ads basically don't cover the expense costs of hosting all that furry content. So basically it's more of a time issue and not a money issue. And that is in and of itself its own concern. So obviously if you are a big SoFurry fan and you do have some technical skills to bring to the table and you want to maintain and make sure that this site maintains itself, volunteering for that site is going to be very important in the future. Now, obviously, they're competing for those resources with Ink Bunny and with FurAffinity. And it sounds like FurAffinity has definitely gotten its personnel up to stuff. If you took a look at the map that they made, basically technical debt fixes kind of stood out to me a little bit. And what technical debt is, it's a statement in information technology and those kind of corporates basically going, well, we don't have the staff to do the technical things and provide the kind of skill set that we need in order to move forward with a bunch of these things. And it's very important that that thing sort of gets done before you can do things like those audio player updates and those writing updates. And it looks like FurAffinity has, handled those technical debt issues, which is great because that technical debt was probably the big thing that was holding it back from growing. And it sounds like, unfortunately, SoFurry finds itself in a position where it might be facing a technical debt because the two people who have the skills and who are running the show are too busy with their actual in real life work that is taking up their time, resources, to maintain their ability to fund SoFurry and fund their own life and their own shelter and transportation and all those other upkeep costs of life. So, as I said, a year ago, I would not have seen this being in this position. So it's very rare that I'm surprised. Pleasantly surprised in FurAffinity's case, and unpleasantly surprised in SoFurry's case that it's in this position. Because as a person who really enjoys furry writing and written works of the furry fandom, I really do wish the best for SoFurry to recover, and that it's, SoFurry next update goes smoothly, and that that the works are maintained, and that the site is still able to serve the fandom, because it is a very important resource that has been around for a very long time. So I believe it is the oldest one of these kind of Web 2.0 sites that came out of the woodwork. I think it was before SoFurry, but obviously before FurAffinity. But I think FurAffinity obviously took over the number one slot. So it's always not who's first, but who gets who draws in the most audience. And that's always important to know when you're starting a business. It's not always who's first; it's who there's some luck and some skill, and obviously we'll see how it comes from here. So, what do you guys think about the future of SoFurry and FurAffinity? Kick a comment in the comment section, kick that like, kick the subscribe button. I'm going to get the hop out of here. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much.